The final piece of this is the probabilistic duration model, and this is actually borrowed from some work by Will Daniels at the Colorado School of Mines. So when we design deployments, obviously we're optimizing device placement around prevailing wind patterns. We're trying to get devices downwind of potential leak sources as much as possible. But with wind direction varying so much over time, most sources generally achieve pretty good downwind coverage when you look at longer timescales. It's when you're looking at shorter timescales, so 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. In the short term, the winds can shift in unfavorable directions, and you temporarily can have the plume kind of pointing away from the entire network of sensors. So the PDM approach starts by calculating that source coverage. We can tell if the plume, if a leak source is covered by the devices. And so if a sensor is downwind of a source at any given moment in time, that is good coverage. And then once we know that coverage, whether it's covered or not, we can examine periods when methane readings drop, and then we can evaluate, did those dips coincide with periods of reduced coverage? So this is kind of a simplistic example, but we can see readings on the top left. We had some activity, and then we look, and source coverage is quite good. If we notice that plume drifting away, we will actually calculate that, okay, the wind direction is now such that coverage will drop. And if we see a coinciding drop in concentrations, the model will keep that emission alive. And so if the gap is short enough, again, we're talking about time spans of 5, 10, 15 minutes. We're not going to be extending emissions by days or weeks or anything. But if the gap is short enough, the probabilistic duration model, it's asking a probability question. How likely is it that emission genuinely stopped right at the moment when coverage dropped off, and then restarted exactly when the interval, during the interval when the coverage was regained? In reality, the scenario is extremely unlikely, and especially over short time spans. And so PDM maintains continuity. Unless there's strong evidence that the emission is truly ended, we'll keep it open. So one of the best ways to visualize this, I like to use the example of a panning security camera. So you don't always have eyes everywhere, but if you have the camera panning and you see a robbery in progress and the camera then briefly pans away, you're obviously going to assume that robbery didn't stop the instant the camera moved. You're going to assume that it continues while out of sight. And if camera pans back after a few seconds or minutes later, you're not going to assume that a new second unrelated robbery is happening. It's clearly the same event. And so PDM is using that kind of same logic. Short-term blind spots caused by shifting winds shouldn't artificially chop emissions into multiple pieces or stop them instantly. And instead, the model is using that coverage probability to preserve kind of realistic continuous emissions when the evidence supports it.